Hola. So welcome back to the 7th lecture, the final lecture in this series on believers, contemplatives, and the future of human civilization. Rather a grandiose title. The final one in this series, but a little bit broader than that. This is the final lecture, the 9th lecture that I began in January, with 2 lectures before this series began, in which over these 9, including this Dharma talk, map out or highlight 6 types of intelligence that are cultivated along the path to awakening, 6 types of mental balance that are intrinsic to our mental health and well-being. And it's simply a format, like I'm a flower arranger. I didn't grow any of the flowers. I just arranged the flowers. And so that's no big deal. The people who did all the hard work are the people that raised the flowers themselves. And so the arrangement of this 6-fold matrix of mental balance, it's an arrangement that I put together. And they map quite well onto the 6 perfections, or a bit more literally, the 6 transcendences, which form the framework of the entire Bodhisattva way of life. And this is where we began last January, in one lecture covering bodhicitta, the Bodhisattva precepts. Then we covered cognitive intelligence, which is the intelligence of our aspirations, our ideals, our intentions, our motivations. And I would say, without any doubt at all, the highest, most noble conation or motivation, resolve, intention that one could have, because I can't imagine anything beyond it, is bodhicitta. Bodhicitta. The aspiration, but not only an aspiration, but a resolve, a commitment, a promise to all sentient beings in the presence of the Buddhas to achieve perfect enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. My imagination doesn't stretch beyond that. How could there be anything nobler than that, to aspire for perfect awakening and for the sake of all sentient beings without exception? And with that is the motivation, then we turn to the first of the 6 perfections, or transcendence, transcendent generosity. Both bodhicitta and transcendent generosity, I would say, are expressions of connate intelligence, because as we cultivate the perfection or the transcendent generosity, we're turning our whole lives into an expression of service for all those around us. Everything we do, implicitly or explicitly, in service to others, right? And at the same time, as an offering to all the Buddhas. And so the first 2 then are all about conation. That for activities we can have all kinds of motivation, but is the motivation one to be of service? One with devout reverence to make an offering to the divine. So, conation. The very next perfection, or transcendence, is ethics. Well, of course, transcendent ethics. There we go into the Bodhisattva way of life. So now we have 3. And then among these 6 transcendences, patience and enthusiastic perseverance. And I would say this is all about ethical intelligence, ethical balance. Because when the going gets tough, we're meeting with adversity, we meet awful people who treat us terribly, and so on. We witness the amount of evil there is in the world. Sometimes it's too much to bear. But if we fall into despair, then we're useless. And so to balance out our emotions, develop emotional intelligence, to transform all adversity into the path, well, that's really an expression of emotional intelligence. But as we practice, sometimes our inspiration may diminish a bit, flag a bit. We may grow a bit weary, in which case we need that next one, the 4th transcendence, transcendent enthusiasm, zest, enthusiastic perseverance, to lift us up when we're kind of slowing down, bogging down, kind of losing inspiration, then uplifting us. And so those 2, of patience, of enthusiastic perseverance, clearly related to emotional intelligence. The next one's obvious. It's the transcendent meditation, and that's really shamatha. It's above all, it's shamatha, which is about developing attention skills, mindfulness, introspection, samadhi, which is the immediate prerequisite to the sixth, and that is transcendent wisdom, perfection of wisdom. And of course, that is cognitive intelligence. Cognitive intelligence, seeing reality it is, not conflating our projections upon that which is there, and not blotting out, obscuring, or denying that which is there because of our preconceived biases, prejudices, blind spots. And history is full of these. Racism and misogyny are classic examples of this, where we don't see something that's right there in our faces, we don't see it because of prejudice that we bring to different races, to a particular gender that's had a tough time for the last 250,000 years under male domination. But then what about the sixth type of intelligence, the sixth type of balance? There's not only the six transcendences, but then there are actually, in an extended version, 10. And the final 4 are expressions of or nurtured by transcendent wisdom. And the 10th, we'll just leap right to the 10th, is transcendent primordial consciousness. That's the culminating one. Perfection of or transcendent primordial consciousness. And this is the ultimate. This really fundamentally boils down to dharmakāya, the mind of a Buddha, because it's fathoming, thoroughly fathoming the actual nature of phenomena. How all phenomena are empty of their own inherent nature, intrinsic identity. But also this primordial consciousness is fully cognizant of the full range of phenomena, the diversity of phenomena, and sees the two as being non-dual. And so primordial consciousness, that clearly is the expression of spiritual intelligence par excellence, to its culmination. So here we come at the end of 7 lectures for this more briefer series of 7 or 9 lectures. We come to the culmination. So there's a lot of context that goes into the talk I'm about to share with you. And so if you wanted to see the full richness of it, you might want to go back and backtrack to the earlier ones if there's sufficient interest. But this one also is a standalone. It can be understood all by itself. Because when we go to this depth of mystical realization, mystical insight, then from my perspective as a scholar of comparative contemplative practice, comparative religion, but above all, comparative contemplative traditions around the world, that's what I focused on during my years at Stanford. When we come to this level, I do find some very deep, deep convergence among religions that start out very differently. What's more different than the Pali Canon and the Old Testament? You see, they have nothing to talk about. They are so different. We can just say, well, let's get together and let's be really loving and compassionate, kumbaya. That they could do. But in terms of going into any kind of theology, it would be hard to imagine two worldviews more different than the Pali Canon and Theravada Buddhism and the Old Testament or the Jewish Bible. But as disparate as they are, when we go to mystical Judaism, then we find something in the Ayin, in the Kabbalah. Wow, that's different from the Old Testament. It's not disengaged from it, not refuting it, but it transcends it into something that's universal. And likewise, you go start with the Theravada, the Pali Canon, and then leap right to Dzogchen. You say, these must be 2 different traditions. And yet they're not. The roots are in the Shravakayana, that first turning. But the final fruition, certainly from the perspective of Tibetan Buddhism, that's what I am, it's all of a stream. It's 9 yanas, 9 spiritual vehicles, culminating in the 9th of Dzogchen, or Mahamudra. And there's great commonality here. The greatest differences are down on the ground level. The Quran, the Tao Te Ching, the Upanishads, they're so different. You say, well, look, never the twain shall meet, right? But you go to the culmination of the Vedas, which are so different from, let's say, the Pali Canon and so forth, but go to the culmination, the Vedanta, and you say, oh, but this looks a lot like Dzogchen. Oh, this looks a lot like Neoplatonic Christianity, but that actually looks a lot like, wow. And so that's where we're going immediately. We're going to the top of the mountain, which gives us the greatest view. There's one of my favorite stories in the Pali Canon, and I don't want to linger here too long because Atiśa is waiting for me to get to his text, his instructions. But it's a lovely story from the Pali Canon that I think pertains directly to spiritual intent. Sometimes we get more from a story than we do from a lot of, didactic discourse. It's from the Dona Sutta, the discourse pertaining to Dona. And he was a Brahman during the time of the Buddha, of course. And the Brahman saw, as he's out walking, he saw footprints of the 1,000-spoked wheels of the Blessed One's footprints. It's one of the 35 symbols of the Buddha's body, indicating he's fully awakened. And he tracked him, and he saw these are amazing footprints. Who made these footprints? What? And so he tracked him. And he he saw that they were complete in all respects, and he said, he thought to himself, it's astounding, it's amazing. These surely could not be the footprints of a human being. That was his first thought. Maybe it's an extraterrestrial or something, but this isn't a human footprint. And so, well, he tracked the Buddha, and he saw him sitting at the foot of a tree, graceful, inspiring confidence, with peaceful faculties, peaceful mind, one who had attained to the highest taming and serenity. He approached him in awe and asked him whether he was a god. And back then, that was not an unreasonable question. In India, 2,600 years ago, it was not at all uncommon for gods or other beings to take on human form. It was a perfectly good question. And the Buddha said, no, I'm not a god. And then he thought, well, are you an angelic being? Another kind of celestial. Are you an angelic being, a celestial being? The Buddha said, no. Are you an earth spirit? And the Buddha said, no. He's running out of options here. And then he said, are you a human being? And the Buddha said, no. Born from a human father, born from a human mother, married a human wife, sired a human child? And he said, no, I'm not a human being. Then what are you? He said, then what are you? And the Buddha replied, I am awake, which is synonymous with I'm a Buddha. But I like the etymology. Buddha means one who is awake. I'm awake. And he concluded in this short sutta, in verse, as a lovely white lotus is not soiled by the water, I am not soiled by the world. Therefore, O Brahman, I am a Buddha. I'm awake. Especially in Mahayana, especially Vajrayana, especially Mahamudra and Dzogchen, we very often encounter the phrase, all phenomena are like dreams, are dream-like. So imagine you're in a dream, an ordinary dream, but you're a really good person. And in the midst of the dream, you develop bodhicitta. There you are. Bodhicitta. And then you start engaging in acts of generosity, wonderful acts of generosity, philanthropy and so on. Wonderful. And you continue from there to lead a really ethical way of life, following the Bodhisattva precepts. Great, wonderful. And you develop forbearance in the midst of adversity when difficulties really happen, that forbearance, that composure, that imperturbability of the third perfection. But also you develop this enthusiasm for Dharma, this joy in Dharma. And in the midst of your dream, this is now a pretty long dream, then you say, oh, I've really got to develop samadhi. My mind is not really serviceable. I can't draw on the full potential of my mind if it's just scattered, flip-flopping between laxity and excitation, laxity and excitation. That's like a car that's breaking down every 50 feet or so forth. And so I've got to develop, make my mind serviceable by cultivating samadhi. Oh, I wish I had a shade for you. The sun is really, but you're shining. And so you develop samadhi in the dream. Wow, you're really single-pointed in the dream. And then you say, but what was the point of samadhi? To fathom the nature of reality and my experiencing. And you start investigating and investigating by hearing, thinking, meditation, and you fathom within this dream, wow, all these appearances, they're appearing, but they're not really there. I'm appearing, but I'm not really here. And the appearances seem to be over there, and I seem to be over here, but that's not really any real duality between inherently existent objects and inherently existent subjects. I get it. You're really fathoming the nature of, for you, what is reality. It's the only reality you know. Congratulations, you've achieved all the 6 perfections. But there's one thing you haven't fathomed yet. And it's the most important thing. You're dreaming. You haven't become lucid. But in that moment in which you become lucid, and it's a discontinuity, all of you who have had lucid dreams, you know it's not a smooth transition of I'm not lucid, I'm not doing a little bit lucid, a little bit more lucid. No, it's not lucid, lucid, bang. Because your whole perspective on reality is just shifted to one who is awake within the dream, as opposed to a person who's taking everything in the dream as the only reality there is. Well, if you're in a dream, what's the most important thing to do? Is to wake up to the fact that you're dreaming, because otherwise you're fundamentally misconstruing the very nature of your own identity and everything you experience. This is the theme of Mahamudra and Dzogchen. There are 9 yanas, glorious, every one of them is glorious, magnificent, virtuous, leading towards enlightenment. But in Mahamudra and Dzogchen, which are coextensive with respect to the teachings here, above all, there's one thing to realize: to wake up to the actual nature of your mind and to know who you are. And everything else is secondary. Once you're lucid, everything is different. When you're not lucid, everything's the same. Because you fundamentally, it's not only that you don't get it, but you get it wrong. Because you think, I'm already awake. That's a problem. Now, a final point from my years of friendship and collaboration with really quite a world-famous expert in lucid dreaming, Stephen LeBerge, back in the 1990s. We were both at Stanford together. We did a number of workshops together. So he's really very expert and very experienced. He had like 1,000 lucid dreams of his own. And he commented that one of the easiest ways to become lucid in a dream is having a nightmare. And that same point is made by Padmasambhava in the book Natural Liberation. If you're in the midst of a nightmare, it's probably really bizarre. And it's definitely unpleasant. That's why we call it a nightmare. But when you see these really bizarre things, one of them may very well jar you. Hey, this can't be real. This is too weird. I just saw a Volkswagen fly through the air with a dragon on top of it. Now, that just can't happen. And good, then you're lucid. Or it's just so unpleasant that you think, oh, this has got to be a dream. You have a real incentive to wake up when the dream is really awful. And it's one of the easiest ways to become lucid. Very well known, scientifically, and going back another 900 years, to Buddhism as well. I'll end on this note before we go right to the text. Anybody who's paying attention to the political scene in America right now, you might be wondering, how could this possibly happen? And you look around at the hot spots around in the world, haven't we learned anything yet? Wasn't World War II enough? Didn't we learn our lesson of bombing civilians? Didn't we grow out of that? And the answer is no, emphatically we have not. And we see what we're doing to the ecosphere. How could we spoil the only planet that's livable? Anybody who's dreaming of setting off to Mars, you're going to be very lonely there. And it's like the world will be after we've trashed it completely. So why are you even thinking about that? How could we be so delusional to spoil the only magnificent planet we have? This has got to be a dream. This is turning into a nightmare. And for many people, it's not turning into, it's already become. You know the hot spots as well as I do. They're not waiting for tremendous tragedy that's undermining civilization as they know it. They're not waiting. It's in their face right now, right? I'm not reading newspaper. As of November 5th, I'm not reading newspapers anymore. I didn't before, I just read the headlines, but now even that's too much. So in really dire times, catastrophic times, unbelievably grim and evil times, it's been said for centuries, that's when Dzogchen is the most powerful. That's when it's easiest to wake up in the midst of a nightmare of this waking life. Boy, does that give us an incentive to waking up and not just incrementally trying to be a better person day by day. It's not going to be enough. And so that's it. That's the preamble to this precious text. And it's a text only when it was written down about 4 or 5 generations after Atiśa by the Sakya monk or the Buddhist monk Kumara, who received the teaching purely as an oral transmission from his Lama, who is named Lama Takyel. I didn't count the number, but it's like 4 generations after Atiśa, who first imparted these ear-whispered pith instructions on Mahamudra to his disciple named Gumbawa. And then Gumbawa passed it on to, from generation to generation, but for very sacred texts that are very deep in meaning and possibly lending themselves to misunderstanding. It's an ancient tradition. Don't write them down. Pass it on so every person who receives it is receiving it from a person who has fathomed it, understood it, and will transmit it correctly. And if you have misconceptions, clean them up right on the spot. Rather than simply reading a dead letter, just a text, which doesn't really dialogue with you, and then running the danger of misunderstanding entirely. So that was true going back to the time of the Buddha. For a long, long time, his teachings were not written down. It was all oral transmission, eventually written down. And likewise for these Mahamudra teachings. And so a little bit, tiny bit, extremely brief background on my own. How do I have the audacity, the temerity to give teachings on this text, for which the oral transmission vanished centuries ago? The text was buried deep in the archives in the Potala, and just recently came to light as if like a dharma. But I have received teachings on Mahamudra, going back to 1976, when Geshe Rabten imparted to me, and I was interpreter when he was giving the teachings, his transmission and oral commentary on the 4th Pension Rinpoche's root text and commentary on Mahamudra. That was in 1976, in which he integrated the Gelugpa approach with the Kagyu approach. It was brilliant. I was just in awe when I was receiving these teachings when I was 26 years old. And so that's when I was first introduced. The second time was in the mid-1990s. Now I'd made a very strong connection with my root Dzogchen Lama, Gyatso Rinpoche. And during the mid-1990s, he gave quite extensive teachings on Mahamudra, the 4 yogas, and during which I was served as his interpreter. So again, I was deeply moved. In fact, the first public teachings he gave, for which he asked me to be interpreter for him in 1990, was on Mahamudra, Shamatha and Vipassana within the Mahamudra tradition. So he led me right there. In 2017, 2019, on 2 occasions, I had the tremendous privilege to receive pith instructions on the 4 yogas of Mahamudra to one of the great Mahamudra masters of the modern era, and that is Gyatso Rinpoche, His Eminence Gyatso Rinpoche. And so on 2 occasions I received pith instructions from him, and he's certainly one of my lamas, revered lamas, and that was from the Dikung Kagyu tradition. The teachings I received from Gyatso Rinpoche were from the Karma Kagyu, based on teachings by Karma Chame, who integrated Dzogchen and Mahamudra. And the 16th Gyalwang Karmapa, he knew Gyatso Rinpoche very well. And when they were together, I think it was in Hawaii many years ago, Gyalwang Karmapa said to Gyatso Rinpoche, "You're the best of our tukuls. You are an incarnation of Karma Chame." And so, with deep reverence, Gachin Rinpoche set in 2017, 2019, and then finally, over the last couple of years, I've had the wonderful privilege, priceless privilege, to be under the guidance of one of the foremost Bhutanese meditation masters today, and that is Tupen Lama Kama, and receiving teaching. I've received teachings from him in Santa Barbara, where we invited him years ago, but then online, and he's been giving teachings also, which I've received, on Mahamudra in the Drupakakyu tradition. So those are my four Mahamudra teacher lamas, and so those four streams of wisdom and blessings, oral transmission, they've flowed to me, and then what I'll share with you this afternoon is basically a combining of these streams. And apart from the wisdom and the blessings that I've received from my lamas, I really have nothing to say at all. I would look at this page, I would look at this as, that looks pretty cool, I wonder what it means. And that would be my teaching. Okay? So if I have anything worthwhile to say for this next hour, an hour and a half, already half an hour's gone by, then it's, you know who's really speaking, it's the people behind me. Gachin Rinpoche and so forth and so on. So the title of this pith instruction is Essential Synthesized Practical Instructions on the co-emergent union. We'll see very quickly what the co-emergent union is. And this is Mahamudra granted by the Noble Lord Atiśa to his disciple Gumbawa. So let's just jump right in then, yes? But although this is transmitted to his disciple roughly 1,000 years ago, I find it simply timeless. Whether these teachings were given 1,000 years ago, or 2,000, or 200, or 20 years ago, or today, they're completely timeless. And I do find that they are quite universal. I can easily imagine a very devout Sufi, a follower of Vedanta, a Taoist, a Christian mystic, following, for example, the Neoplatonic tradition. I easily imagine they would just slightly adjust some of the terminology and say, but I relate to this. This is really, really deep. I know this is reminiscent of teachings in our own tradition. That is my strong conviction. So, the person who wrote this down, as I mentioned before, is the Shakya monk, Bhikshu, Kumara. And so he begins, now he's the first one that wrote it down. And so he's writing down, and what does he say? The master commented that the practical instructions on co-emergent union Lord Atiśa gave to Gumbawa, these practical instructions are very profound. Very profound. So when he says the master, it's the Lama from whom he received the teachings himself. But now he's writing them down. One reason for writing them down is if society becomes a bit unstable, and there's questions whether the lineage will be preserved orally, then you might want to write it down. Something stable. Then there's a book that stays there on your shelf, whether or not you die. So the co-emergent, and then he's going to go right to the core of it. He doesn't beat around the bush. The co-emergent actual nature of the mind is the dharmakāya. And co-emergent appearances are the light of the dharmakāya. So when it says co-emergent union, what is arising as co-emergent events, arising simultaneously, or on the one hand, the actual nature of the mind, and the other hand, the nature of appearances. They're arising simultaneously. But the actual nature of the mind is the dharmakāya, and appearances are effulgences, creative expressions, like the light of dharmakāya, and the two are non-dual. So there it is. That's it in a nutshell. As they say when you're giving a public presentation, say what you're going to say it, and then say what you've said. Sum up. Well, that's what he does here. This is what I'm going to talk about. The union of these two, the actual nature of mind, dharmakāya, and the co-emergent appearances that are the light, the expression of dharmakāya. And he said that those two are like the sun and its rays, or like sandalwood and its fragrance. So again, as a rather retired religious studies scholar, because I haven't been in academia very happily for a very long time, it's called panentheism. Well, it's not just an academic term, but panentheism is something we find in mystical traditions all over the world. You don't find it in Theravada. You don't find it in the Old Testament. I'm not sure you find it in the Quran. I haven't studied it. But you do find it in the mystical depths of the Sufi, the Vedanta, Dzogchen, and the Mahamudra traditions. Panentheism, that the whole of reality is suffused by the divine, is an expression of the divine. And in Vajrayana practice, you're cultivating pure vision and divine identity. But first you absolutely must realize the emptiness of inherent nature of the phenomena you're perceiving, because if they really exist as they appear, then that's it. As they appear, that's how they are. And boy, this, even Crestone isn't quite a pure land, let alone Detroit or Los Angeles and so on. So objectively, you have to see that there's nothing there from its own side, inherently existent. And in that emptiness, then there is an infinite field of potential for the divine to shine through. And likewise, if you're walking around with a reified, stale, static, grumpy, old sense of yourself, and this is who I really am, this is the real me, then lots of luck, because you're stuck with that. But if you perceive that when you say your name, there's actually no one in here that corresponds to that name. You're empty of you. And hallelujah! Because if you're not really who you think you are, then there's infinite potential for being something you never imagined you would be. Namely a Buddha. Appearances to the contrary. And so, with stage regeneration, by way of imagination, by faith, and so forth, you are imagining your guru as a Buddha. You're imagining all appearances as Pure Land. You're imagining yourself as Padmasambhava, Avalokiteshvara. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Whereas a Mahamudra, you cut right to it without any side trips of imagination, visualization, and so forth. You just cut through the veils of who you already think you are. Cut through the veils of the appearing reality and thinking it is as it appears. You cut through that with a razor-sharp blade of Manjushri, the sword of wisdom. And in the emptiness, then you may see through the veil of appearances to see how things actually exist, that your mind is dharmakāya, and all appearances to your mind are expressions of dharmakāya, like the sun and its rays. Okay, boom, he starts out with an exclamation mark. This is what that co-emergent union is. And I would say, now using my own terminology, but right there, that's the culmination of transcendent primordial consciousness. It's viewing reality from the perspective of a Buddha. Now he goes right into practice. When is time to practice? When is it not time to practice? That's maybe a better question. The day that you're not running out of life, the day that you're not getting older, maybe that's the day you can take a break. But I haven't encountered that day yet. So when it's time to practice, the Guru's practical instructions on the mind's essential nature, manifest nature, and defining character, the Guru's instructions are on the mind's essential nature, manifest nature, and defining characteristics. It's going immediately to view. This is classic in many aspects of Buddhism. View, meditation, and conduct. But you start with a view. And why do you start with view? Because we're already viewing reality and we're getting it wrong. So you don't want to start your practice on a false premise of an ignorance of nature of reality and getting it wrong. So therefore, he's going to challenge our ordinary sense of how the world is and who we are by addressing and inviting us to investigate with vipassana, with cognitive intelligence, investigating the essential nature of our own minds, manifest nature of our own minds, defining characteristics of our own minds. Examine them thoroughly, and you open the door to perceiving how your mind actually exists and its relationship with the rest of reality. So, in an extremely concise manner, he's going to explain the meaning of each of these terms. And it begins, the essential nature of the mind is its lack of origination, cessation, and location. I could spend the rest of the hour on that one right there. Your mind, the mind you're very familiar with, the mind that torments you on occasion, bores you to death on occasion, brings you joy on occasion. This mind that comes out with so many ideas and plans, hopes and fears. Was there ever any point of time when it actually, truly, inherently came into existence? Whether in your mother's womb or before then or after then? Was there a time when your mind inherently, by its own nature, wasn't and then was? And if you can find that moment, I congratulate you. The Buddhists have looked for it. They can't find any origination. You look for it and you find, but there was no point. Not during the 9 months of gestation, not when you're a little kid, not before then, not in the bardo, not before then. The mind that you're so familiar with, the mind that you have, the mind, the having of which makes you a sentient being, in Tibetan Sem Chen, a mind haver, it never actually came into existence. Not really. Conventionally, sure. But really, no. So you're not really a sentient being because there was no point in time when you actually became a sentient being. When you weren't before and then you were. That never happened. And then, if your mind never actually came into existence, then you don't have to worry that this truly existent mind will one day cease. Not at death, not after death. If it never really came into existence, it's never going to really pass away from existence, pass out of existence. And then we have location. This is the fun one. You find this really omnipresent in Dzogchen and Mahamudra teaching on the nature of mind. You think you have a mind? Oh yeah? If your mind exists, it's got to be somewhere, right? You can't say it exists, but it doesn't exist anywhere at all. Well, then that doesn't lead anywhere at all. If your mind exists, it's got to be somewhere. You think it's the brain? Don't be duped by all the media propaganda that your mind is inside your brain. It's poppycock, balderdash, quatch. Do you want to show off more languages that I've had a sprinkling of? It's nonsense. Your frontal cortex isn't where the mind is located. Correlates of mental activities, yes, but the mind that is clearly non-physical, because nobody's ever measured it physically or objectively, is not located anywhere in the brain, nor in the heart, nor in your intestines. Yes, there are neurons down there, but there's no mind in your guts, or nowhere else in the body, but then it's not outside your body. You look for that mind that you identify with so strongly, and it's actually not to be found anywhere. It's devoid of location. So it never came into existence, it's not located anywhere, and it doesn't go anywhere. That kind of gives us a strong message. The actual nature of the mind is empty of inherent nature. It's not really there. Never came in, never goes out. That's kind of a relief, because then we don't have to take quite so seriously our status as sentient beings. Because where is that sentient being that you think is you? When we point at somebody, hey you, point it at the chest, but anybody in there? Don't think so. So that's the essential nature as an analogy. Over the course of the seasons, during the summer when clouds and mist disappear, this is up in Tibet, in the winter when storms do not arise, and in the autumn when the sky is pristine, such that if you look at the sky, a clear, luminous, indescribable vividness appears. It's a powerful analogy. The clear, radiant sky of autumn. He said, likewise regarding the thoughts of your mind. When the previous ones have ceased, later ones have not yet arisen, and in the interim, they're not located anywhere. There is a vivid clarity that is luminous while being devoid of any inherent nature. That's what's left in those intervals between thoughts. You're attending vividly, discerningly, wide awake, attending to the space of awareness, and in those intervals between thoughts, you don't see mind anywhere. You don't see it in here, you don't see it over there. You just see this clear, luminous, indescribable vividness that is devoid of inherent nature. It true is not truly existent. So that's the actual nature. The manifest nature of the mind appears in various ways, and yet this nature is devoid of origination, cessation, and location. The manifest nature of the mind is the sheer luminosity of awareness, that which makes manifest all manner of appearances, during dreams, sensory appearances, mental appearances, when you have memories, imaginations, thoughts, and so forth, that which makes manifest, that which illuminates all experiences of any kind, from that of an aphid up to a Buddha, that which makes manifest experiences is the sheer luminosity of awareness, which is the manifest nature of mind. And anybody think that neurons or synapses actually make manifest appearances, you're seriously mistaken. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I've studied physics rather extensively since 1984. The notion that non-physical phenomena, physical phenomena like neurons, synapses, chemicals, energy, and so forth, would actually give rise to something non-physical like the luminosity of awareness is preposterous. And also there's no evidence for it. But that doesn't prevent a lot of people from believing in it because of their commitment to matter being primary. It's a metaphysical stance. That's the manifest nature, which appears in various ways, and yet that luminosity itself is not truly originating, truly ceasing, or truly located anywhere. So that union, that non-duality of luminosity and emptiness. The emptiness is luminous, the luminosity is empty, non-dual. The defining characteristics of the mind appear and are conceptualized as various joys and sorrows, white and red, likes and dislikes. So the defining characteristics are all the things that we experience, that appear to us and that we conceptualize, we designate, we identify. So joys and sorrows, they're very high on our list of priorities. We want joys, sorrows, no thank you. White and red, that might throw you, but these are just like a sampling of the myriad appearances to the senses. White and red, loud and quiet, rough and smooth, and so forth. Just the whole variety, the polarities of loud and soft and so forth and so on. Sensory experiences, and then likes and dislikes. Those three, the essential nature, manifest nature, and defining characteristics, do not exist as three different things. For the co-emergent mind, and that is this mind that co-emerges with appearances, is not something separate, inherent, dualistic. The co-emergent mind itself, free of conceptual elaborations, manifests in such modes of appearance. The ground, the ultimate ground of being, which is dharmakāya, indivisible from dharmadhatu, the ground is unmodified. That's what we're starting out with, something that transcends time, transcends change, the ultimate ground of being. It's not matter. That's actually one more preposterous idea. It doesn't work. It hasn't been working ever since quantum mechanics came along and blew it out of the water. But people are slow to catch up on the cutting-edge science, which has been going on for more than a century. The ground is unmodified, transcending time. The path, how do we realize the nature of the ground, of the whole of reality and of our own identity? The path is undistracted and unimpeded. Undistracted. Maintain an ongoing flow of mindfulness, of attentiveness, of presence that's not impeded by thoughts, beliefs, and so forth and so on. We have the ground, the path, and the fruition is free of hope and fear. You're beyond it. A Buddha has no hopes or fears. Nothing to hope for, nothing to fear. And so these are to be practiced. What's to be practiced? The ground, the path, and fruition. So that's what you do when it's time to practice. But then now, being a bit more specific, at the time of practice, when you're actually sitting down and say, okay, I want to practice Mahamudra, what do I do? At the time of practice, sit on a comfortable cushion in the posture of Arochana, with its 7 qualities, including the Vajrasana, or the full lotus position, and cultivate the 4 measurables for the sake of all sentient beings. So I've noticed this little term, comfortable cushion, for a very long time. Sit in a comfortable cushion, and preferably in full lotus, with all the 7 characteristics of Arochana. It's a classic optimal position for meditation. But he does say on a comfortable cushion. But as soon as you go, especially as we get into, a little bit middle age or maybe actually old like me, sitting in the Vajrasana for any sustained period of time may be excruciating. Let alone if you have problems with your knees or scoliosis or any other kind of problem, maybe basically from your knees up to your shoulders. That can be really uncomfortable. So for you, there is no such thing as a comfortable cushion. Because as soon as you sit on it, you're uncomfortable. Or very quickly you will be. So you can interview cushions all the time, as much as you like. Are you comfortable? Are you uncomfortable? And they don't answer. Because there's no such thing as a comfortable cushion unless you sit on it. And then it's either comfortable or uncomfortable. And so there's a lot of give there. Gachin Rinpoche has commented on this. If you can't be comfortable seated in the full lotus, try the half lotus. Not the half lotus, the bodhisattva position. If you can't be comfortable sitting cross-legged, then find a nice chair. If the chair doesn't work, then just lie down and be comfortable. It's actually most important that you're comfortable. Because if you're not comfortable, whatever your age, whatever your body condition is, if you're not comfortable and you're trying to meditate, your body's going to be nagging at you. And who wants a body that nags? So better a body that just be quiet, and so you can get on with what's really important. And that's your meditation. So first of all, settle your body in its natural state, and let your spine be straight. Even if you have scoliosis, well, let it be as straight as it can be. Then, he goes right to it. All phenomena of the appearing worlds of samsara and nirvana are your own mind. All the phenomena means everything that appears. Of galaxies, of black holes, of electrons, of Higgs bosons, of thoughts, dreams, and so forth and so on. We know of all these natural phenomena only by way of appearances. We never leap over the appearances and see how they really are independent of appearance. Nobody can do that. Not physicists, not contemplatives, nobody. And so all these, everything we know of the universe, whether you're a physicist or you're a mystic, or something in between, consists of appearances. And these appearances are effulgences of your own mind. Now, it's not solipsism. It's not solipsism, that everybody just make up your own reality. They didn't get stoned on LSD back then, so that was not something you would consider. Our minds are entangled. Our minds have different sentient beings. 8 billion human beings on the planet, the 20 billion animals on the planet. We're existing in what is ostensibly the same environment, perceiving it from different perspectives, but with a certain commonality. Whoever if you are, you bump into fire, you find it's hot. If you walk into a wall, you find it solid. And so there's a commonality there, but it's not because there's an externally existent, inherently matter. It's rather that there's a great deal of commonality in the karma that produces these appearances, individually and collectively. Now that's a testable hypothesis. And if you're wondering, well, what about the other hypothesis? That what provides the commonality of our experience is because there's matter out there, stupid, and it's inherently existent, except that was just fine until quantum mechanics came along and has blown it out of the water. Some of the most distinguished physicists alive at the Institute for Advanced Studies and elsewhere have come to an emphatic conclusion that space and time are not objectively existent. They're not really out there. And one of them, Nima Qadi Ahmed, brilliant physicist at the Institute for Advanced Study, he commented, this is a real blow to us physicists. Because if there's no space and time out there, then whatever became of the physical world? And now there's no container for matter that's really out there. So this is a real problem, and I'm not joking. Now this is not some new age fly-by-night, stoned on acid kind of physicist. It doesn't get better than him. He's like, well, one of the Einsteins of this modern era. So materialism is dead. It's walking around like a zombie. Sit down. You're already dead. Would you please sit down? And it doesn't, because it's got a lot of inertia behind it. But we start there. All phenomena are the mind, effulgences, appearances to the mind, which if you stop right there, you'll be a chittamatran, a mind-only philosopher. But you'd still be clinging to your mind, but at least my mind is real. All these appearances, they're not really out there at all. They're just like displays, like watching images on a television screen. But my mind's real, right? Until you bring in Nagarjuna with his blazing sword and he said, stop right there. Where is this mind of yours? And he's already answered the question. It never came into existence and not located anywhere. It doesn't go anywhere. Your mind is as empty of inherent nature as any objective appearance or anything out there in the physical world. But then, in terms of preliminaries, what kind of preliminary practices, mundo, do we need to engage in this practice authentically? And in one line, Atiśa said, well, try the four immeasurables. They tremendously purify the mind. They're laying the foundation for bodhicitta. So sit down, settle your body, speech, and mind in natural states, and then cultivate the four immeasurables: loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and impartiality. Then all phenomena of the appearing worlds of samsara and nirvana are your own mind, and then cut off all false assumptions, preconceptions, projections regarding the mind, being devoid of origination, cessation, and location. Cut off everything you thought was right that was uncritically accepted. Going along with the flow, where scientists speak with apparent authority, and in fact, in this particular case, don't know what they're talking about. I've read a lot of scientific writing about the mind, and they wring their hands. Oh, how is it that the brain generates consciousness? It's such a mystery. No, it's not, because it doesn't. There's no evidence the brain generates consciousness. So stop wringing your hands and start thinking afresh. Are there correlations between brain activity and mental processes? Of course, but that doesn't mean the brain generates them. So mind does not originate from the brain. There's no evidence that it does. Only correlations, the nature of which is still unknown. After 150 years, 175 years of mind science, how does the mind and body relate? What's the nature of the correlation? They don't know. They've actually made no progress because they're pretending as if they already know that the mind is simply a function of the brain. This is superstition. And it's groundless in terms of compelling empirical evidence. So, cut off all fonts, everything you've learned in the 20th and 21st century. Pause right there. You just may very well have been duped from the time you were 5 years old. And then he goes to the core of the practice. You're sitting there resting in the stillness of your awareness. And then, specifically regarding rumination, thoughts, images, mental activities, do not modify, do not block, do not think, and do not accomplish. Four neti. Don't do four things. There's a fifth one that he doesn't say, because that goes without saying in Tibet 1,000 years ago. Don't get caught up in rumination. So he's addressing in that one very short sentence the remedies for overcoming four types of addiction. And I mean very literally addiction. Every bit as much as alcoholism or addiction to drugs, addiction to gambling, and so on. The first addiction, and I'm just unpacking this, is what I call OCDD, obsessive compulsive delusional disorder, which is endemic. It's not at all the same as OCD. It's endemic. It's the natural state of the mind in the 21st century, and probably was to a large extent in earlier centuries. But when I say OCDD, thoughts, when you're sitting quietly, you say, okay, now I want to practice Dzogchen. Mind, be quiet. I'm busy now. Be quiet. And within a second or two, it's saying, how quiet do you want me to be? Let's talk about it. What part of shut up don't you understand? They say, you want me to? You shut up. The thoughts come up obsessively. And you can't simply decide, I really mean it. It's not going to work. Or somebody gives you $1 million, have no thoughts arise for the next 60 seconds. They're going to walk away with their money. The thoughts arise obsessively, which means they're not under your control. They just happen. They continue happening. Is that true or not? If what I just said is not true, then come and join our hermitage. We have just a place for you. But that's the obsessive part. But it's not only that they arise obsessively, but we compulsively appropriate and identify with them. We get dissolved into them, and we think, I'm thinking, I'm imagining, I'm hoping, I'm fearing. It's compulsively fusing our awareness with these activities of the mind. And again, it's not voluntary. OCD, delusional. In ordinary rumination, and that's what mind scientists often call it, in ordinary rumination, where the mind is just basically, the mind is in charge and just dragging us behind, there is a very strong tendency to delusionally conflate whatever we're thinking with reality. To think whatever I'm thinking, that's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Whatever I think about this person, whatever I think about American politics, whatever I think about, that's just the way things are. It's delusional. And that's the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Well, no thought ever captures the whole of truth. So it's delusional, and that's a disorder. And so that's an addiction. But then when we sit down to try to remedy it, the first thing we might try to do is modify them. I don't like these thoughts. I'll come up with better ones. And then we start thinking manufactured thoughts, modified thoughts. That's one way of addressing it, but that's another addiction. Of just thinking I can fix the mind by tweaking it. And I'll keep on tweaking it until I tweak myself to death. That's one possibility. That's one addiction. But he said, don't do that. Break the habit. Do not block. I will not think about that. I will not think about it. Good luck with that. It doesn't work. Just to tell the thoughts, especially specific types of thoughts, I'm not going to think about that anymore until your guard goes down and they're just running back in again. He said, don't block. Wow. Do not modify. Do not block. Do not think. We often think whatever comes up, I can just think myself out of it. Lots of luck. It's just more thinking. And then do not accomplish. It's really, really striking. He said, when you're sitting there in meditation, do not hold the thought, and now I want to accomplish this. I want to accomplish shamatha. All of these are modifications of a mind that is fundamentally dualistic and delusional. And there's no fixing it. Step back into awareness, a simple, clear, lucid, discerning awareness that is still and observing the movements of the mind without being carried away by them. It's very simple and very difficult. But it's difficult not because the technique is difficult, it's difficult because our addictions are so deeply ingrained in our habits. Do not reflect on previous thoughts. Don't go down memory lane. That's another addiction. People are experiencing PTSD, and I know very little about it, but I'm pretty sure they linger on the past a lot, and involuntarily. Do not reflect upon or get immersed in previous thoughts, memories, and so forth. Do not anticipate later ones. People are dreading the future. People are anxious, chronically, systematically, dreading what's coming. Don't go there. You don't know what's coming. So why take tomorrow's misery into today when don't you have enough troubles in the moment? So do not anticipate or focus on anything in the present. This is a clear separation of your mind from your awareness from the mind. You're not blocking your mind, you're not modifying and so forth, but you're resting in the still purity of your own awareness, luminous and cognizant, and observing all the motions of the mind without appropriating them, mine, without reifying them, thinking they're inherently, objectively real. Events in a dream become powerful. They can terrorize you, fill you with grief and sadness, disturb you. Events in a dream, only because you're reifying them. If you see them what they are, empty appearances, every bit as empty as appearances on a movie screen, they have no power whatsoever of their own. They don't even exist from their own side. But if you reify them, then you can burst into tears when you're watching a movie, or be freaked out in horror watching a horror movie, and so forth and so on. Why? Because you're reifying something that isn't even there at all. There's nobody in your television, especially the flat screen ones. And so, simply rest in a clear, non-conceptual state, pristinely pure and relaxed. Be at ease. In that way, rest utterly relaxed in the luminous, empty essential nature of consciousness. As a result of resting in that way, if random and unruly thoughts occur, Whenever such a sudden thought first emerges, it is the co-emergent actual nature of the mind itself. It's not coming from any place other than the actual nature of your mind, which is emptiness. They're just empty appearances arising from emptiness. So there's really no threat there. There's nothing to hope for, nothing to fear. And even if it, that is any of these unruly or random thoughts, even if it lingers for a while, it remains right where it is. It remains right there in the co-emergent actual nature of the mind. It never parts from this ground, the emptiness of the mind itself, which in one Dharma talk I heard His Holiness give in Strasbourg years ago, is that if you actually fathom the actual nature of your own mind, that is nirvana. The actual nature of your mind is nirvana. So is nirvana not someplace in the future, it's not someplace else. Fathom how your mind actually exists, not how it appears or how you reify it, cling to it and appropriate it. That's nirvana. And even when these unruly thoughts, even when it finally dissolves, it fades right back into the co-emergent. And it is released clearly and vividly into the domain of the dharmakāya. So on a relative level, or the obscurative level, looking at the three-tiered model of the mind, we have the coarse mind, the psyche that we're all very familiar with. From what does this emerge conventionally in terms of appearances? In the formation of a fetus, it emerges from the substrate consciousness. Not inherently existent, but that's where it emerges from. And all the appearances are rising from the substrate, the space of awareness. So relatively speaking, all these thoughts and so forth are emerging not from atoms, not from the brain, not from anything outside. They're emerging from a subtler dimension or stream of consciousness known as the alaya vijnana, or substrate consciousness. But this isn't a text on shamatha, where we stop there. Okay, substrate consciousness, let your mind dissolve into the substrate consciousness, achieve shamatha. Great. But no, we've gone beyond that. So what does reality look like from the perspective of dharmakāya, from the co-emergent actual nature of the mind? And from that perspective, all these thoughts are arising right from the dharmakāya. And they dissolve right back into the dharmakāya. That's the ultimate perspective. That's spiritual intelligence, and not simply cognitive intelligence by means of which you realize emptiness. This is like clouds that suddenly emerge in the clear sky. When they first emerge, it is from the sky itself. For as long as they linger, they remain right in the sky, and when they finally dissolve, they fade back into the sky. In that way, know that there's nothing apart from the co-emergent. This is the ultimate perspective. This is the deepest spiritual intelligence there is. This is panentheism, where you're viewing reality with pure vision and with the knowing, the self-knowing dharmakāya, pristine awareness. And from that perspective, you know from that perspective, there is nothing other than dharmakāya and appearances to dharmakāya, and they're co-emergent. So it goes right to the top of the mountain. As a result of meditating, the four kinds of yoga will gradually arise. These are the four sequential stages of yoga. From the beginning of really deeply realized Mahamudra practice to its culmination of Buddhahood itself, he's going to give an extremely concise account of each of these four, which is the whole map, the whole path of Mahamudra. Vividly remaining without dispersion in the luminous, essential nature of the mind, which has no inherent nature, is called the yoga of single-pointedness. It's the first yoga. There are only 4 steps here. Otherwise, we have 10 bhumis, we have 5 paths, we have all kinds, 37 aspects of the path and so forth. But here it all boils down to just 4 yogas. But the backstory from this, that I know from Karma Chamet, from Gyatso Rinpoche, is to actually realize this first yoga of single-pointedness. You must have achieved shamatha. You must have a mind that is serviceable, that is stable, clear. You must have that. The mind now is fit for action. It's serviceable. You must have achieved shamatha. Otherwise, you don't reach the first yoga. In addition to that, and that's attentional intelligence, in addition to that, using this finely honed mind with samadhi, You investigate the nature of reality, especially of your own mind. This is with cognitive intelligence, and you fathom the emptiness of inherent nature of your mind. You must realize that. So now two things, shamatha vipassana. But there's a third element here that makes this a path of Mahamudra, as opposed to the general Sutrayana path of 5 paths and 10 bhumis and so forth. And that is the mind with which you are realizing emptiness, the actual nature of your mind. The awareness with which you are realizing it is pristine awareness. It's primordial consciousness. You must have cut through the layers of your conditioned mind. By practicing Mahamudra or Dzogchen, cut through that, and to use Dzogchen terminology, cutting through to the original purity of pristine awareness, getting a glimpse of that, of this unborn awareness, unconditioned, which is none other than dharmakāya. You must have accessed that, cut through to that, and have that as your perspective from which you realize the emptiness of your own mind. With those three, shamatha vipassana, and having ascertained unborn awareness, then you enter the path. Then you achieve, with those three components, all three essential, then you achieve the first yoga of single-pointedness. That's also, by the way, for those of you who studied Dzogchen, especially in the Dujumlingpa lineage, that's when you enter the path of Dzogchen, shamatha vipassana, and having cut through to the nature of primordial consciousness. So it's the same. The entry of both of those paths is the same. But because you are realizing emptiness from the perspective of unborn awareness, unconditioned from primordial consciousness, because of that, your rate of progress along the 5 paths to enlightenment is warp drive. I mean, it's fantastically accelerated because you're viewing reality from the perspective of pristine awareness, which is Mahamudra, which is Dzogchen. When that arises, still about the yoga of single-pointedness, when that arises in your mind stream, there's a sense that reification of mundane appearances is diminishing. You haven't cut through it entirely yet, but you can see it's fading out. You're coming to your senses, in a manner of speaking. And you think that at times your meditation is going well, but sometimes you think your consciousness is separated from the moisture of the actual nature of reality. So you're not quite stabilized yet. In this way, there are many ups and downs. Sustaining yourself with the practical instructions, repeatedly rest unwaveringly in meditative equipoise and gain familiarity with it. So for those who have some background in Sutrayana, the first path is path of accumulation, second path of preparation. It takes, in Sutrayana, one countless eon, which is, let's say, a really, 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 really long time, to progress along the first 2 paths. It's eons. But this can be done in a matter of years, because this first yoga covers the entirety of the path of accumulation, the first one, and the entirety of the path of preparation with 4 stages, all of them with one yoga, all of them in a matter of just mere years. It's just absolutely flabbergasting how the accelerant goes here. And for one reason, you've cut through to pristine awareness. First yoga. When you realize the luminous, non-conceptual, essential nature of consciousness as the dharmakāya. Now there's no doubt in your mind, this awareness with which you're aware, it's dharmakāya, it's Buddha mind. Free of all extremes of conceptual elaboration, free of all conceptual networks, everything you think, every framework, transcending all of that, including the very concepts of existence and non-existence, permanence and annihilation, going and coming and so on. You've transcended all conceptual fabrications. That is the yoga free of elaboration. Elaboration is conceptualization. Here is where you reach the Mahayana path of seeing, the third path, which to reach that, again, one countless eon in Sutrayana time. You reach the first bhumi, the first Arya Bodhisattva ground, and you have this non-conceptual, non-dual, unmediated realization of the actual nature of a mind, and the mind that realizes that is primordial consciousness, and your consciousness and the emptiness which you have realized are non-dual. You become a vidyadhara. That's it. That's the second yoga. When that arises in your mind stream, all previous phenomena are peeled away, and conventional elaborations are cut off, which is like an impoverished person finding a treasure. Until then, you probably thought you were a sentient being. You're impoverished, you're a beggar, scrounging around for tidbits in the wheel of samsara. And now you just recognize, I'm not a beggar, I'm not a sentient being. I've never been a sentient being. You are a vidyatara. And that's your treasure. What's the treasure? What's that dharma? It's the nature of your own awareness. It's dharmakāya. Moving on, through familiarization with this, you recognize that everything that appears as the inanimate environment and its sentient inhabitants, everything is your own mind, and that the nature of your mind is unoriginated. That's where this co-emergent comes in. All these phenomena of the nature of your mind, and your mind is empty, and therefore the two, both equally empty of inherent nature, are co-emergent. And that's called the yoga of the one taste of the manifold. And that is the one taste of samsara and nirvana. For the whole of the Sutrayana, including Mahayana, you want to get out of samsara, for heaven's sake, especially Shravakayana. Samsara sucks. The Pali Canon, samsara is a burning pit of, misery. Get out and achieve nirvana and never come back. Well, for the Bodhisattva, come back. But you still want out of samsara. Whereas when you're deep into the realm of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, you see samsara and nirvana is non-dual, and you have no preference for nirvana over samsara. Achieving this takes you to the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth bhumis in one yoga. You've gone all the way up to the eighth bhumi. Could be a matter of years, instead of one countless eon. From the first bhumi to the eighth, one countless eon. And now it's collapsed into. When that arises in your mind stream, although thoughts of dualistic grasping appear in various ways, the thoughts appear by realizing the co-emergent actual nature of your mind to be the dharmakāya. They're naturally purified and dispersed right where they are. You just see them arise, and they're gone. By gaining familiarity in that way, your consciousness is freed from being either the object of meditation or that which is meditating. So all sense of dualistic grasping vanished. And without any division between meditative equipoise and the post-meditative state. So now you no longer have meditation sessions, because there's no longer any division between formal meditation sessions and then what on earth do you do in between sessions? There are no in-between sessions. It's homogeneous, continuous. And without any division between meditative equipoise and the post-meditative state, you realize subject and object is non-dual. And this is called the yoga of non-meditation. It's the culminating yoga. It comes in 3 stages, which covers the bodhisattva bhumis of 8th, 9th, and 10th. No, 9th and 10th, and then Buddhahood. 2 through 8 were covered by the previous yoga, but the culmination of the great stage of the yoga of non-meditation, that's Buddhahood. He said, now he's quoting his teacher again, he said that when that arises in your mind stream, since your own mind is realized to be the dharmakāya, and you realize it's always been the dharmakāya, it's not something freshly accomplished or achieved, it's always been dharmakāya. It's so much, my favorite analogy recently is like a consummate actor, like a brilliant actor. But the actor gets so immersed in the role, let's say Meryl Streep, she's a good example. Imagine something that's never happened, that Meryl Streep gets so totally immersed in a role she's playing that she forgets who she is. She forgets entirely that she's a very famous actor, one of the most gifted in modern history. She forgets that entirely, and she thinks she is the role, because he's played it so well, that she now thinks she is the played character. And she's forgotten who she is. That's what we are. We've always been Buddhas. The world is but a stage, and we are but actors upon it. But we are actors and not the characters in the play. And to wake up to who we really are is such an enormous relief. That's called the yoga of non-meditation. And he said that when that arises in your mind stream, since your own mind is realized to be dharmakāya, the flames of mental addictions are cleared away, and all virtuous qualities arise by the force of that. They spontaneously manifest. There's nothing more to do. The essential nature of the mind is luminous and non-conceptual. Its manifest nature is free of origination, cessation, and location. Its defining characteristics consist of samsara, nirvana, and so on, appearing as concepts. We make sense of them by way of concepts. And during the period of single-pointedness, just its essential nature is realized. So that's how you begin. As a result of gradually cultivating the four yogas, even though your mind is realized to be the unoriginated dharmakāya, when such things as illness and suffering come along, this is due to being enclosed within the casing of the ordinary body. Now, in the Pali Canon, it's true of the body of an arhat. The body of an arhat can still get sick. It can be wounded with weapons and so forth. The person's mind is utterly free, immutable bliss of nirvana, but the body was created by previous karma, and until that karma is extinguished, you still got, what did St. Francis call it, brother donkey? Something like that. You still got this ass of a body, and it hurts and then you hurt because you're still experiencing the body. But don't worry, that too will pass. As analogies, when the king of beasts, it's the lion, when the king of beasts is in its mother's womb, even though its three strengths are complete, they're enclosed within its mother's body. So it's a lion cub and it's in the mother's womb, right? It's a full-fledged lion. But the three strengths of a lion are its scent, and when out on the Serengeti plain, if any animal out there picks up the scent of a lion, they're going to head the opposite direction. They're terrified of the scent alone, let alone the roar of a lion. It freaks out everybody, including human beings. Its scent, its roar, and its third one is? Fearlessness, yeah. King of beasts isn't afraid of anyone. So that's your nature. You are a lion. But as long as you're encased within the womb of, encased within the body, the full majesty, the splendor, the power of your own realization of dharmakāya still is somewhat enclosed. Don't worry, that too will pass. He gives another analogy. Even though the wings of a garuda inside its shell are fully developed, they're enclosed by the casing of the shell, so it can't fly. Not because its wings aren't good, it's inside the shell. So, those are two analogies. Although you inwardly realize your mind to be the dharmakāya, you're not free of the casing of the body created by past karma. So there's no contradiction in joys and sorrows and so on continuing to arise. So joys and sorrows will still arise, but you're neither appropriating or reifying them. It's like sitting in a nice, warm cabin, totally safe and comfortable, and watching a lightning and thunderstorm, ferocious outside. And then the sun coming out, and then hail coming down, and then snow coming down, and you see all the seasons coming and going. You're witnessing them all, but you've got a nice cabin here in Crestone. And you're not out there, subject to all the vicissitudes of weather. It's like that. As a result of practicing in that way at the time of death, the elements of earth dissolves into water, water dissolves into fire, fire dissolves into air, and air dissolves into consciousness. And when the vital energy and mind enter the avaduti, the central channel, they come to ride upon the naturally present, co-emergent, primordial consciousness, the actual nature of reality. This is how you die. If you become the vidyatara, you have some profound realization of primordial consciousness. You're dying lucidly. Your body's shutting down. The body, on the one hand, is like any other body. It dies. And all the power of the earth element and so forth dissolve into space. They dissolve into consciousness. That happens to everybody. But most people are non-lucid when they die, just as most people are non-lucid when they fall asleep. It's a very strong analogy. But you have realized primordial consciousness. You witness fearlessly, luminously, cognitively, blissfully. You observe your body dying. You observe your mind dissolving back into the substrate, what's called the dark near attainment. You observe all this lucidly. It's like falling deep asleep and being radiantly lucid when you get there. And then there's more to come. Because you have meditated in that way in the past, you'll recognize this dissolution and the actual nature of reality at its culmination, as if you were meeting an old acquaintance. Because you've already realized the clear light of the mind. You've already realized the emptiness of inherent nature. So, oh yeah, you again. Howdy. You're familiar with it. As if you're meeting an old acquaintance, and the natural clear light and the clear light cultivated in meditation, the mother and child clear light, will meet so that you achieve the siddhi of Mahamudra. Then from the sphere of clear light and emptiness, you arise as a divine embodiment of the union of the two, that's emptiness and the divine embodiment, maybe Vajrasattva or Tara, wherever it may be. You arise as a divine embodiment of the union of two, which manifests as enlightened embodiments in order to serve every sentient being, according to the way each one must be trained. And by taking on illusion-like bodies, whose nature is the mind, and which comes from undefiled karma, you serve the needs of others. So that's how you achieve enlightenment. You transform what many people dread more than anything else: death, extinction, annihilation. And you transform that into the greatest celebration of your whole existence. You transmute that very dying process into manifestly and actually becoming a Buddha. And a Buddha is manifesting in one form, let's say Padmasambhava, but then emanating throughout the universe in a myriad of ways. Each emanation emanated in order to best serve those who you're tending to. That's the ultimate transformation. Taking the worst of situations and turning it into the best of situations. That's if you've practiced well. On the other hand, if you've not meditated in that way, you will not recognize the clear light of death. And even if you do, you get some glimpse of it. By the force of the nature of reifying it and grasping to signs, you'll be frightened and terrified of it. Joseph Conrad, his character, took place in Africa. Any Conrad fans here? The person has lived not a very good life and he encounters death, and his last words are, the horror, the horror. Check out your Jaffa. It was not 60 years ago I read it, but it really made an impression. It could be the worst experience you've had in your life, the end of it, the horror, the loss of everything you've loved, and then encountering an abyss, what looks to you like an abyss, and being absolutely existentially terrified of it. There lies my extinction. But you're wrong. Because you never knew who you were when you were alive, and now you don't know who you are when you're dying, from ignorance to ignorance. By crossing the border of life and death with the causes of craving and appropriation, craving for a new life, I want to be embodied. Plato wrote about this. Socrates knew about this. Pythagoras knew about this. It's not just an Asian thing. But you've died, you're in the bardo, and the primary concern is your mind is, I want back in, I want a body, the craving, I want to be embodied, I want to be somebody again. And then you find somebody to latch onto, an egg and sperm, looks good to me, and then you appropriate it. You take that as your body. Something that was never yours. Your dad's sperm and your mom's egg, they never belonged to you. But you just appropriated them. And then as you grow in the fetus, as the fetus grows in the womb, then you really get the hang of it. Yeah, this is me. And then you pop out through that little narrow hole and you start screaming your head off. This is no fun. I wish I hadn't appropriated this little sucker called a body. By continuously spinning around in the cycle of samsara in this way, due to karma and so forth, you must take on immeasurable suffering. So the whole notion, this lovely myth, rest in peace, rest in peace. There's nobody down there in the dirt. It's decaying matter. There's nobody resting there. Nobody's resting. You're dead and your consciousness moves on. And the notion that it would be extinguished, dream on. It's a pipe dream. It's advocated by people who don't know what they're talking about. People who do know what they're talking about remain in tukdam for maybe 2 or 3, 4 weeks. Those are the people who know what they're talking about. Now that's empirical evidence. Some of my own teachers have died in tukdam. People who know about the nature of death, those are the ones who achieve rainbow body. Those who know about the nature of death are the ones who, as children in the next lifetime, recall their previous one, for which there's an enormous amount of scientific evidence now. let alone thousands of years in Asia. So the notion that death is extinction is a happy thought. But you may as well believe in tooth fairies. It's a superstition. Therefore, this practical instruction on co-emergent union, which is the remedy for that, it's the remedy for samsara, for suffering that actually never ends. Can you imagine? Does anybody really want to dwell there? The notion that lights out, you're finished. Wow, what a relief! Oh, you only have to live once. Live once. You have only one life to live. What a sweet thought! But it's just complete delusional. The notion that your consciousness can never turn into nothing is absolutely daunting. Never will your consciousness turn into nothing. So you either have samsara forever, or you get smart and find a way to liberation. But there's no door number 3. Like, I don't want to play anymore. There's no door number 3. Sorry. I wish I could grant it. Oh, you don't want to exist anymore? Well, go for the third door. It's called rest in peace forever. Oh, he's deep asleep. Kvatch. What nonsense. So, therefore, this practical instruction on co-emergent union, which is a remedy for that, was received from the speech of the sublime guru, his guru, tracing back to Atiśa. Meditate on it without distraction. If you have something more important to do, you better get that out of your system, because when all is said and done, this is the only thing to do. When the time is ripe, there's nothing more important than this. My conviction is absolute here. Meditate on it without distraction. Don't get distracted by anything else. Samsara has 1 billion trillion allures, but you haven't tried this yet. You haven't tried this yet. Oh, you haven't been to Tahiti? Well, you haven't lived until you've been to Tahiti. Or you haven't lived until you become president of America. Or you haven't lived. It's just one more allure after another, and they all wind up being dead ends, literally, aging, sickness, and death. So meditate on it without distraction to augment your realization. So you covered meditate, you covered the view, meditation, and now conduct. To augment your realizations between sessions, devote yourself with boundless enthusiasm to offering the mandala and so forth. If you can't find a mandala, then offer anything that's of value to you. Make prayers of supplication to your guru and the 3 jewels, creating satsa, acts of devotion, performing circumambulations, that's good. We have 2 stupas in the neighborhood. That's cool. Offering prostrations to the divine, reciting liturgies and mantras, engaging in acts of generosity, and so forth. In other words, just devote yourself to virtue in between sessions, and then go right back to resting in the stillness of awareness. And by practicing in that way over the course of days, months, and years, progress will come. So he's not talking about eons here, days, months, and years. He said that with your post-meditative consciousness in all circumstances, you should recognize everything as being like an illusion. So maintain your understanding of emptiness between sessions. We're almost finished here, 90 minutes later. So then the colophon by the man who wrote this down, and he writes in conclusion, these essential, synthesized, practical instructions on co-emergent union were written down by the Shakya Bhikshu Kumara. He wrote it down. The lineage proceeds from Vajradhara, the primordial Buddha, to Tilopa. He taught it to Naropa, and I'll pause right there. Naropa, the great Naropa, he received this from Tilopa. Then, in terms of a lineage that we're familiar with, from Naropa, 2 major streams. Marpa went down to India and received Mahamudra from Naropa, right? Atiśa in India received Mahamudra from Naropa. Marpa and Atiśa, Marpa the Tibetan and Atiśa the Tibetan, received the Mahamudra from the same Mahasiddha, Naropa. Atiśa received it from 2 other Mahasiddhas as well. And so then in Tibet, it goes from Marpa to Milarepa to Gampopa and Rechungpa, and then to the multiple traditions of the Kagyu tradition, Digu Kagyu, Karma, Drukpa, and so forth. But by way of Gampopa, who first trained in the Kadampa tradition and then under Milarepa, then it goes into the Kadampa tradition and also into other lineages within the Kagyu tradition. And so, Naropa was seminal here. But in the lineage that Atiśa received, goes from Naropa to Dombi Heruka, another Mahamudra, another Mahasiddha with whom Atiśa trained, then Atiśa, then his disciple, Gumbawa Wangchuk Gyaltsen, who lived in the 11th century, From him to Domdrumpa, personal disciple of Atiśa, and then some famous names, Botowa, who wrote down the 7-point mind training, you remember that one? Sharwana, Tapkawa, to Khenchen Jamyak, and then his teacher, Lama Takyel, that is the teacher of the person who wrote down, and he taught it to me. He taught it to me. And that's the end of the text. That text with its 3 pages or so is enough to achieve enlightenment in one lifetime. So that's that. So for those of us, many of us here are fortunate enough to live in Crestone. Some, like myself, kind of newcomers. But it really is truly a blessed place. Going back to the Native Americans, the Hopis and other tribes who have inhabited this place, a place of peace, a place of non-conflict. So it has an ancient history, a blessed history going back for centuries. In the recent past, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the first Tibetan Lama who came to Crestone was Gyalwang Karmapa in 1980. Is that correct? 1980, he was the first one. And his host is right here on this trunk. She and her husband, Maurice. So I want to thank you for inviting him here. He was deeply, deeply moved by this environment and had a very strong sense that the future of this region would bear tremendous fruit for the people practicing here. And I had the chance to meet him once back in 1981. He came here in 1980, and I met him in 1981 in Delhi. A very close disciple of his asked me to come. She had a meeting with him, an audience, and she asked me to come interpret, so I interpreted for the two of them. That's when I met him. And I've met the 17th Karmapa a number of times. So it's a very blessed place, and we're enormously fortunate. And really, I think I've meditated all over the world in various retreat places in Asia, North America, and so on. I've never been in a more conducive environment than this. It's truly sublime. And thanks to Father Eric and his colleagues creating this enriched environment, blessed by decades of practice of Christian contemplative practices, methods. We are the heirs, the recipients of ancient and recent blessedness and blessings. And so on that note, I think I will close. Now it's 3:35. Would you like to end with maybe just a 10-minute meditation? Okay, let's do that. Best end on silence. And so let's please find a comfortable position, including there's floor space. If you want to lie down, you can. As if with a huge sigh of relief. Release all the burdens of the past that are no more, and the anticipated burdens of the future that have not yet come. And with your body at ease, your breath flowing effortlessly, rest your awareness in its own stillness, self-knowing, self-illuminating. Like that clear autumnal sky that Atiśa spoke of. Let your eyes be open, but vacantly rest your gaze in the space in front of you, but without looking at anything. Simply rest in this spaciousness, with no inside or outside. And with your awareness so relaxed, so utterly at ease, loose, relaxed, rest in that stillness of your awareness, which is still like space, not like a bee that hovers motionlessly and then darts off. But your awareness is indivisible from space, and space does not move. And thoughts come and go, over which we have no control, but do not need to have any control. Like clouds appearing in the sky, scudding across the sky, and disappearing into the sky. Let thoughts, memories, and so on arise unimpededly without blocking them. But simply witness them from the stillness of your awareness. Do not modify, do not block, do not think. Abandon any notion of accomplishing anything. And just rest in that luminous stillness, which is neither here nor there. With this one simple step, you've stepped outside of your psyche, your past, your present, and your future. You've stepped outside of your mind into an awareness that has no beginning, will have no end. And this simple, unelaborated, non-conceptual clarity and cognizance, this is a ray of dharmakāya, of pristine awareness. It is not other than primordial consciousness. And through continuous practicing, simply by resting in this unelaborated awareness, for days, weeks, months on end, you will find that your mind implodes, dissolves, withdraws into this simple awareness, which manifests then as the substrate consciousness, that subtle continuum of consciousness that carries on from lifetime to lifetime, known by way of shamatha. This is the direct portal to that subtler dimension. And simply by resting in that subtle flow of luminosity and cognizance, without reifying it, ascertaining its emptiness of inherent nature. You may cut through this conditioned consciousness to the unborn, unoriginated awareness. Of pristine awareness. Primordial consciousness. And by resting while completely deactivating your mind, that stream will carry you effortlessly all the way to the full realization of dharmakāya, and you will know yourself to be a Buddha. And let's bring this session to a close. So in these troubled times, that are bound to be more and more troubled in the coming decades, it's already a given. It can come as a huge relief that there's still a way for us in this contemporary era to find a straight path of not doing, of releasing our body, speech, and mind, and of not doing, and finding this is the most direct path to realizing who we've always been. So that's all this afternoon. I hope this was meaningful for you. It's a tremendous privilege for me to be able to transmit the sublime teachings of Atiśa, of Naropa, of Vajradhara himself. So I wish you a wonderful day. And I should end on this very brief note. I mentioned this is the last lecture in the series, actually the last in 2 series. And I am taking my first break from retreat since I began in January of last year. I received an invitation that I just felt I couldn't turn down to give a keynote lecture on Buddhism and science in Taiwan. So I will be taking that break, be away for 1 week, meet with some very interesting people with whom we may forge some very meaningful collaboration between our CCR and the Tzu-Chi Charitable Foundation in Taiwan. It's an amazing organization, tremendous philanthropy. And the nun who founded it is an extraordinary Mahasattva. And so I'll be there for about 4 or 5 days, come back. And I'll come back on the winter solstice and immediately dive, and disappear pretty much for 6 months at least until the summer solstice. So I won't be giving any public teachings during that time. So I will be off in silence. But the teachings here that Atiśa gave all of us here, can easily fill the coming 6 months. They are rooted in his 7-point mind training. If you're wondering what's the real preliminary to be able to drive the full benefit of those 2.5 pages of teaching, it's the 7-point mind training from Atiśa. It's amazing, the richness and the preciseness, the brevity of this teaching. So for those who find that these teachings of Atiśa, primordial teachings, really touch your heart, resonate with you, arouse a sense of faith and confidence, but also arouse a sense, I'd really like to practice that. Then, as Padmasambhava says in the Vajra Essence, if you have faith and intuitive affirmation of such teachings and the desire to practice, consider yourself to be qualified. You don't have to worry about how many prostrations you've done or how many mandala offerings, and so on and so on. That's all good, but that's enough. If this really speaks to your heart, Atiśa's sublime words of Mahamudrā, faith and wish to practice, however long you've been practicing Dharma, however old or young you may be, now is the time. Don't hesitate. Don't think, oh, there's something I need to do first. But do cultivate the ground in which this wish-fulfilling tree will grow. 7-point mind training. It really does. It covers everything. And the taste of Mahamudra is already there in the 7-point mind training, in his teachings, 4 aphorisms in the cultivation of ultimate bodhicitta. So Michelle, my old buddy Michelle, right here, our executive director of the Santa Barbara Institute, she's going to put together a follow-up announcement now that I've shared what I can. My satchel is empty. I gave you everything I could in 90 minutes. But she'll send out a follow-up announcement with, well, if you'd really like to fill the next 6 months, at least, with these teachings, then here are other texts you could read and retreats you could listen to, and that would really provide the very rich, fertile soil for these extremely quintessential teachings to really take root. And 6 months is enough time to really get the taste. So you're going to get a very full announcement from her within the next week or so, with a number of links here and there and there. Certainly enough to keep you busy for 6 months. And busy with enormously meaningful, transformative practices, theory and practice. So that's what I'd be offering to you over the next 6 months, while I put a zipper on my lips and really try to remain as silent as I possibly can. As Atiśa said, and this, I'll really end on this note, but Atiśa, he spent, 13 years in Tibet, I think. In India, he was one of the superstars. He was like an Einstein. He was like a Niels Bohr. In India, he was a superstar. He's a Mahasiddha. He's famous around all of India for his tremendous erudition, his profound bodhicitta, and he was a Mahasiddha. He was not just a great scholar and a sweet bodhisattva. And he was invited to go to one of the most primitive places on planet Earth, from maybe the most sophisticated contemplative civilization on Earth in the 10th century. India, I think, was without parallel for the depth of the Dharma that was flourishing. Atiśa said at one point, every day in India we have another Mahasiddha coming up. It was just an amazing time. The Nalanda tradition was still in full flower. And he was invited to go up to, like coming from Harvard to go to the Yukon, to a community college in the Yukon. You know, and you have an endowed chair at Harvard and say, but we just don't have anybody out here in this little backwoods town in the Yukon. Would you please come and teach us? Because we really are hungry from Dharma, but we're really country bumpkins up here, so please come anyway. And he did. He did. And he spent the rest of his life there, teaching and teaching. I'm in love with Atiśa. Really I am. The perfect bodhisattva, the perfect monk, the perfect pandit, and the perfect Mahasiddha, all in one person. They loved him. Ever since then, 1,000 years ago, all the followers of all the 4 traditions of Tibetan Buddhism, they all love Atiśa. They have sectarian rivalry here and there. That's what people do. But they all love Atiśa. They all love Atiśa. It's 7-point mind training practice in all the traditions. He planned to go back to India, but he just felt he couldn't leave because these people had faith. But when he was on the verge of death, he said with complete, I'm sure, with complete calm, serenity, like the Buddha himself, he said, my body's leaving, don't worry. What's important is my speech, the teachings, and they remain with you. So take refuge there. My body's disappearing, no big deal. Bye-bye. And that was it. So bye-bye. I'll see you maybe in 6 months, but I'm not quite sure. Until then, thank you for coming.